how AI is being used by these entities. And then we're going to focus on what I believe is perhaps a way to use AI that's not being explored as much as it should, in which I believe can have a huge impact in social programs in general. So when you talk about AI in society, we have two extreme views. Now, on one hand, you have people who believe that AI is going to further increase the gap between developing and developed countries, between the rich and the poor. It's going to further concentrate power in the hands of a few companies, a few individuals. And of course, there's a number of issues around safety, around privacy, the use of our data. In the other extreme, you have people who believe that AI is a technology that can actually improve the lives of people and can make the world a better place. So I'm not going to discuss what AI can do in the near future, but I would like to focus on what's happening now, both at government and charity levels. So I'm going to give you a few examples of how AI is being used by governments around the world. The first one is a program from the US in which an AI algorithm was used to assess the likelihood of convicts committing a crime again. So it was found out by some journalists that the algorithm was actually targeting Black people or giving them a much higher score than white people just because of the color of their skin. There was no reasoning behind it. And this is actually a very common issue when you use AI, because if you feed the algorithm with data that's biased, that reflects prejudice and racism, the program is going to give you results that, reflect this. So, and I think that's quite ironic, because we tend to think about computers and AI as being something unbiased and precise, but actually the way the models work today, if the data is biased, the results will be biased. So there's a massive discussion around that. Another example, there's a French company that has so far scanned nearly 1 billion faces of people, usually in airports. They use this data to process visa applications, among other things. But of course, there's a number of concerns there. First, that one company has this huge amount of data. Sometimes people are not even aware that this data is being collected. So there are many ways in which this data can be misused. And on the top of that, the algorithm tends to make mistakes again, especially against Black people, and even more against women. So the algorithm tends to misidentify Black people, which of course can have huge consequences for visa application or to the attempt to enter a certain country. You probably have heard in the UK there was a massive this outcry when the government tried to use AI to score students, instead asking them to do the A-levels because of COVID. And among many things, one of the biggest issues was that the program was giving students from schools from rich areas a better grade, or was raising their scores, and was downgrading the scores of students who came from underprivileged areas. So, and again, there was no reason behind it, just the fact that the program was being fed with data that was biased. So again, you have a case of AI reinforcing some prejudice and in some case racism and biased. So at the end, this program was suspended. We have another example of AI being used by the government of Israel, in which they monitor phone calls, Facebook messages, including private messages, and even the movement of Palestinians. And of course, there's a number of human rights, civil rights implications around that. But they use this program to target people who they think might be potential threats. And I found out that the program actually makes some quite serious mistake, and people who have done nothing wrong are being targeted by security forces, maybe because the program misread a certain message or misunderstood a certain comment. And just to finalize this brief overview, we have in China, I mean, this is not done by the Chinese government, but it was done in some schools in China. And I think this is one of the most, perhaps most bizarre attempts to use AI, which basically is a headband that is put on the students in the classroom. And the headband is going to show a light that indicates if the students are concentrating, if they're distracted, how focused they are on the lessons. And not only that, the teacher can see the light in the other students, but they have an app that tracks almost by second what the program thinks is the mental state of the students. Of course, this puts a huge strain on these 8 to 10 years old students. And the science behind it is at least questionable. There's a number of neuroscientists saying that, that doesn't make any sense. You cannot just, by using electrodes, know what people are thinking, or at least know if they're focused or not on something. So I think it's another quite problematic way to use AI, and this has been used, in partnership with the Chinese government in this case. So really, when you look at how AI is being used by governments today, of course, there are exceptions, but what you see is a trend where there's no standard or procedures, there's no international agency trying to enforce those. Ethical issues are not usually considered. There's a big gap between people who design the programs, like machine learning engineers, and actually how these programs are going to be used. So a person who is an AI expert does not necessarily know anything about education, about sanitation, about health. So there's a big gap in terms of expertise, and this, of course, can lead to a number of issues. And as we saw as well, there's a number of questions around the fact that the AI programs, they tend to reinforce and reproduce bias and prejudice. When you look at charities or international NGOs, I think the picture is a bit more promising. So there are a number of applications, especially for final users. So doctors have apps, for example, that can help them to diagnose skin diseases or lung diseases. You have farmers that have apps that help them to manage crops, to identify diseases. So this is very positive, but it's mainly for final users. There are a few very interesting projects done in the third sector. There was research done by some academics. So when you work in a social program, one of the main things you need to do is to find out about educational indicators, health indicators, economic indicators. But in certain areas, these indicators, they don't exist. You don't have sensors, you don't have data that's reliable. So what they did, this group of researchers, they looked at satellite images from a number of areas, a certain area. And first, they looked at the image at night. There is, a weak correlation between how well illuminated an area is and the economic level of this area. So the idea is that areas that are brighter, they tend to have higher economic indicators. So in addition to that, they looked at satellite images taken during the day. So they looked for things like type of roof of houses, especially in rural areas. And they added as well, so the program would go to Wikipedia, find all the entries about that area, and would look for things like bridges, hospitals, roads, markets, schools. And based on all these proxies, the program would give us a rough estimation of the average income of that area. And that is something that's amazing because, you know, when you work in development, in social programs, there's a lot of times that you just don't have the data. There's no way to collect the data because maybe because of wars or, you know, other forms of conflicts, or maybe because you don't have the money, you don't have the time. So having some resources like that can be of great importance, and you know, it can be extremely useful when you work in social programs. Another really interesting use of AI in the third sector is there's an organization that supports human rights lawyers with managing, you know, the vast amount of documents that they usually need to go through. And there's a number of things that AI can help us in this sector, in this area, like, for example, producing summaries of documents, finding the key word or the key sentence or key paragraphs of documents. You can have applications that allow you to type a question and the program goes through all the documents and find the answers for you, so it extracts the answers from certain documents. And all of these, of course, can save a huge amount of money and time and help, in this case, human rights lawyers to have a better case. Similar to this, there's an organization that's very interesting that they have a program that check the claims made by politicians in the media to see if they are actually accurate. So it's a lot to take in, but just to give you a very brief overview of what's going on, I mean, there's much more going on, of course, but in general lines, what we see is both at government and charities, or third sector, is, you know, the programs that are happening now, they are very complex, they are all at high level, they require partnerships between, you know, universities, data companies, governments, very large organizations like UNICEF or the World Bank. They take time, they involve a number of people of many different sectors. So while they're very important because they show what's possible, they are not really part of the day-to-day work of people working in social programs in the public or the third sector. So if you go to the Department of Education, pretty much in any country of the world, and you see what people who are writing the curriculum, people who are program managers, project managers, researchers, it's very unlikely that any of them will actually, you know, have access to AI in a simple and meaningful way to do their work. So it's just not part of their work. And that's even truer, even more true if you look at NGOs or charities. So it's very unlikely that someone who is implementing a project in a charity, an NGO, even the large ones, will have access to AI, to machine learning tools that will help them to do their work. So the picture that we have here is much more like a few organizations thinking, okay, let's create a project to use AI. Which again is very important because it shows what's possible. But I think it's much more meaningful to think about how AI can be used by people working in the field in social programs in a way that's easy and meaningful for them. Because if we manage to do that, then we are more likely to challenge some of the big issues around AI including the fact that it's just not, it's just not accessible. It's now is in the hands of a few organizations, a few countries. So I think if you really want to make it accessible for everybody, we really need to think about how to turn this very complex implementation in technology into something that's easy to use but meaningful for those people. And my focus here, again, is people working in social programs in the public or in the third sector. So how can you do that? So there are few possible solutions. You could have a department in every government or in every large charity that would support all the departments, but this is very expensive. Very, very few charities would be able to have, this kind of resources. And you still have the problem that you have people designing the applications that do not actually have the knowledge or the expertise of someone working in education or health or so on. You could argue that you could train AI specialists to become educators, but I mean, that would take years and years, a lot of investment. It's just not feasible. The other way around as well is, it's just not, there will be, of course, a few people who have expertise in social development and AI, but they are not many. So in my view, I think the best way to do it is really to think about turning complex implementation into simple tools. Because if you do that, then you can have a huge impact in the delivery of programs, in the design, in the outcomes, which means you're going to, you're going to reach more people at a lower cost and probably with a better delivery of results. And this is something, I've been working in the third sector for about 14 years now as a social researcher. And this is something that I've been thinking for a long time. In the past few years, I've been working a lot around AI, machine learning, and so on. And this is a sales pitch, but I decided then to put together, to start a company in my spare time. And the idea is exactly to look how we can make AI accessible to everyone, especially for people working in social programs that can have a direct and huge impact in the lives of people. So the idea behind it, I think, is the best analogy is Google search. If you think Google is the simplest thing ever, you go there and you type, and that's it. You don't need to know anything. There's no training involved. All you have to do is go and type it. But behind it, you have this extremely complex algorithm. But you don't need to know anything about it. All you have to do is to go to the web page and type what you want. So I think, and that's my view, if you really want to move forward, improve what is being done, especially in the third sector, is to have tools that are just as easy to use as a Google search, but that are meaningful. They are designed for social development. So just to give you an idea, and that's something I have developed it, when you work in a social program, you usually have a survey that you're going to get in an Excel spreadsheet. Even a short survey, if you're going to put all the tables together, all the charts, if you're going to do all the statistical analysis and look for correlation and so on, that takes days of the time of a good researcher. And in many cases, you don't have a researcher working in your organization or in your project. But I developed this tool that is essentially this. You're going to upload your Excel spreadsheet, and in less minutes, you get a whole report with all the tables, all the charts, all the statistics, everything that you need. So anyone, even a person who's not a researcher, who knows
Travou aqui. Ô, Lucas, travou aí?
Não.
Travou. Tá gravando. Mas pera aí, ajuda aqui. Internet acaba de cair.
And then the program is going to go through databases like from the UN, from the World Bank, and give you economic indicators, census, everything that you need to start a program. And in those areas where these data do not exist, you could think about proxies, like satellite images, Wikipedias, and getting this information to give us a baseline of what would be the economic indicators, health, education indicators of this area. And this again, this is something that can be done in a minute or two, but then it can save so much time, so much money, and that's also going to show that programs manager, program specialists, people working in this project, they have access to good, reliable data. And of course, there are many other functions that can be designed that can have a huge impact in how we deliver, social programs. So I hope that was not too much to take in, but I will stop for here, and I'm very happy to have a more kind of open discussion with questions and comments, so we can make this a little bit more interactive. If you want to find out more about my company, or if you want to get in touch with me, those are my details. Feel free to do so. And now, please, I would like to open for questions and comments, and so we can have a discussion.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Charles. That's brilliant. It'd be great if people did have some questions and they want to put their hand up in the participants area, or pop one in the chat.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. I think we've got a question from Guy. So,
yeah,
who would like to?
Hi, Joel. Thanks very much for your talk. My question was, basically, why does this kind of thing not already exist? So it's been very well justified, and it makes complete sense that having all of this technology really easily accessible would be obviously a good thing. And I can think of a couple of reasons why it wouldn't, which I'd like your thoughts on. So one is that there's just not the number of people who have the know-how how to implement it and make this available. And another is that the technology is not quite there yet. All of this works. I'm a computer scientist. I work in NLP, so I know how much time people end up having to spend by hand tuning models to make things work really well. So the idea of making it all just work at a click of a button is desirable, but maybe not there yet. I wondered what your thoughts were on those two things.
I mean, in my view, there's actually a lot that can be done already. So just going back to your first question, I think we don't see this a lot, is because it's a quite new technology. If you look at the field, it's a field that's growing still. When you look at research, there are a number of research software that some of them use machine learning and so on, but they are, in my view, they just don't make good use of these models that are not fit for the purpose, like using kind of machine learning models that will not give you a good result if you're going to analyze text, for example. I think there's a big issue around mindset. So people who work in social research, they have a mindset that's been used to working a certain way for a long time, and you usually don't have people who have background in social research and machine learning or anything like that. So I think these are some of the key issues, and I'm sure there are people already thinking about it, but it's just not happened yet. So in regards to your second questions, I do believe, I know that it is possible to do a number of things that can be done just with one click. I have at least a couple of models that I have developed that work around that. Of course, they are, as you said, sometimes you need to fine-tune things, but I think it's, it's totally feasible. I have some experience designing them. When you go to a level of higher complexity, like that one that I mentioned of using satellite images and Wikipedia entries, that is in fact much more complex. But the fact that this was done, this project was done like less than 2 years ago, it shows that it's possible at least at some level. So the question is, how can we make this accessible now? And I think largely there's a number of things that can be done, as you said, with one click. There will be a few others that you might need to get a little bit more involved in how you enter your data or your questionnaire, whatever. But I think largely it's extremely, it's totally possible to design applications that can be accessible and used to use.
Great, thank you very much, and very interesting work.
Great, I think we've got a question from Adam as well.
Good evening, and thank you for the talk. Is it fair to say, kind of tagging on to that question, there's a lack of incentive for developing the AI that is accessible and usable? I think a lot of the thoughts that I have working in parts of the global south is, well, yes, we may well develop NLP for US English and UK English because there's clearly an economic incentive there. When it comes to minority languages, that obviously then feel way down the chain from a motivation from a tech company's perspective. So what can we do to incentivize and make it more attractive for the top innovators to create accessible AI?
Yeah, I think, well, I think you mentioned a good point, because if you think people working in the private sector, especially if they are like AI engineer, a natural language processing engineer, they can earn so much in the private sector that it's really hard for them to decide to move to, working for a charity or for government, and then maybe, then for a fraction of what they earn. In terms of bigger funding, bigger incentive, it's a big issue because, in my view, the biggest challenge is the mindset. So people are not prepared, especially when you look at charities, just not prepared to take this step further, to really think about investing in AI, and that's why I think we need perhaps to change how we see it and try to focus not into getting them to learn AI or to use AI, but create things that they can use on a daily basis and that are simple and make sense for their work. And it's funny because you have organizations like UNICEF that have an office for innovation, but which is all about new technology. It's not only AI, but using drones, everything. But then when you look at the work UNICEF does, there's hardly any use of AI in their day-to-day work. And so I think it's a lot about mindset. There's a gap there that needs to be somehow filled.
Thank you.
Great, I don't know if there were any more. I mean, I actually did have a question for you as well, myself, Sean. I just actually wondered how you saw really the future of AI and these kind of technologies in the third sector, particularly with the COVID-19 pandemic and everything that's gone on. There'll obviously be huge pressures on budgets going forward, but at the same time, sometimes these kind of world events, are a good opportunity really to innovate and do things that are slightly out of the box. So I wondered how you saw the impact really of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the third sector specifically, I think once, we have a few success stories of organizations that have started using AI kind of daily basis, and that has had an impact in the outcomes of the programs, in the budget, so they need less money to do more. Once you have these few success stories, I think things will change very quickly. But the question is how and when this is going to happen. And again, we see even very large organizations with massive budgets they're just not investing enough because, so many reasons. But yeah, perhaps now that there's so much cut, budget, getting funds for anything is getting harder and harder. This might force organizations to start thinking about new solutions, and AI might be one of them.
Rob, thank you very much. I don't know if there were any other questions at all from anyone else. No? Okay. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank you all very much for coming, and to thank Zhao for talking to us today. I think is, certainly for me, I learned an awful lot that I didn't know coming into this. So, yeah, it was really brilliant. And if anyone would like to contact Zhao, I know that put his details up earlier, but you can always respond to one of our emails related to this event, and we can put you in touch with him. So thank you all again for coming, and thank you, Zhao. Take care.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Ah, é. 3 horas depois.